everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Just going to hold off on starting in just a few minutes. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Victor, and I will be moderating today's Smart at Home webinar. First off, if you would like to access captions, go to the meeting controls on the bottom of your screen and select the CC icon titled Live Transcript, and you can click the option Show Subtitle to gain access to captioning, or you can use the stream text link that I will drop in the chat. Please note that the chat is reserved for networking and interacting with one another, so have fun connecting, but any and all questions should be entered in the Q&A located in the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen, or signaled with the raised hand, a function which is also located in the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen, if this is the most accessible option. We're reserving the last 10 minutes of our webinar for Q&A, and we'll try our best to address everyone's questions with the time that we have. That being said, I'll hand it off to today's presenter, Forrest. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome to today. I'm going to quickly share my screen. Give me just a moment. There we go. So for those of you who may have joined us back, I think it was January or February, we talked about rules, routines, and automations for bringing freedom and independence to the disabled community. We had a request to actually go in and talk about some case studies. So go into some detail as to how just off-the-shelf standard smart home technologies are being deployed to bring independence to both the disabled community and aging folks wanting to live in place and stay in their own homes. So I've spent most of my career in technology, and the last probably 10 of it has been focused heavily on automation, home automation, and my current focus is the disabled and senior communities. You know, it's kind of neat for me to be able to say to Alexa, good night, and she shuts off my lights and turns off my entertainment system and locks the door. But for somebody who took 20 minutes getting into bed, it's an absolute game changer. So I did my first home automations for my own purposes back in the mid-90s, so I've been at this a very long time. Just a word of warning, I will say, hey, Google and Alexa quite a bit during today's chat. So if you have those devices listening, you might want to mute them so they don't answer back. Slight deviation from our normal format. Instead of saving the last 10 minutes for Q&A, I'm going to go through 3 case studies, and at the end of each, we'll open it up for a minute or 2, maybe 3, for questions on that specific case study, and then we'll have a few minutes at the end. Feel free to also put questions in that Q&A session that was mentioned before. So for those of you who were not on our previous session, I thought it useful to just talk about the basic elements of home automation. So I break these down into 6 primary categories, if you will. So devices are anything give us input, output, control, allows any device that we need to interact with or our system needs to interact with. That could be motion sensors, it could be lights, smart lighting, it could be smart switches, it could be anything that needs to be controlled or give us information to act upon. Second is networks. So networks are the way the information gets transmitted between different devices. So the primary networks that we usually have today are wide area networks. So Comcast or AT&T brings the internet to your house, and inside your house you typically have either an Ethernet network connection or you have Wi-Fi. Those are networks. So that's the medium through which information is shared. Protocols is the language or the languages that devices are communicating with each other and to the main controller or the hub, and we'll talk about that in a second. And the three primary protocols that are used in smart home automation today are a thing called Zigbee, Z-Wave, and TCP/IP, which is your normal IP that people oftentimes associate with Wi-Fi. But it's very, very important to understand the difference. Wi-Fi as a network is how you get information between devices. The protocols are the languages that the devices speak to each other. Hubs are like the master controllers, if you will. So 15, 20 years ago, many of you may remember, we used to have a different remote for every single device that was in our home entertainment system. We had one for the DVR, one for the TV, one for the AV receiver. And then they came out with this thing called a universal remote, where that remote would control everything. Same thing has happened in the evolution of smart home technologies. So now you have smart home hubs that will talk to a wide variety of device types and manufacturers, all using these common protocols. The human interface is how we as humans communicate with our hub and through the hub to the various devices. So it could be a visual interface. So we have tablets that have nice little dashboards that have maybe weather events. It could be the status of our alarm at our home. It could be whether there's anybody occupying a particular room. It could be temperatures for all the various rooms. It could be a whole number of things. Anything that we can track, anything that's got a sensor, we can actually put a status indicator or some kind of tile onto our dashboard, if you will. Other human interfaces are the voice system. So Alexa in Echo devices or through your Alexa app on your phone or on your PC. It could be Google Assistant, it could be Siri, and there's a handful of others that we can talk about. So those are the primary interfaces, and there are others, but the primary ones are the voice and the visual interfaces. And then we have routines, scenes, and automations. These are the ability to combine a bunch of different things based on events that have happened. So that if a particular thing like an alarm goes off, it can then trigger a handful of things to follow and send me a text message. It could call me, it could turn on the light, it could do any number of things. So that's kind of the magic that puts all these other things together. So let's jump into three very specific use cases, and we'll start with Larry. Larry, we've known for about 3 years now, and he's actually become quite a good friend over the years. His initial scenario is he's got severe ambulatory and manual dexterity challenges. He's got a thing called arthrogryposis, which my understanding is your joints don't form properly. And so he has always been a wheelchair user. He's always had, his entire life, had somebody having to feed him and bathe him and things of that nature. And so his dependence on others has always been extremely high. And through the use of technology, we've lowered that dependence a great deal. And he's an extremely happy character for that. He lives alone, but in a multi-tenant building. So there's lots of folks that are in his immediate vicinity, but he lives in this one-bedroom apartment on his own. He's got a fairly high understanding of technology. So through his entire career, he used his voice to dictate letter writing. He did a lot of switchboard related type stuff. He did financial advice, things of that nature. So he's got a good understanding of technology in general, a good understanding of how to use Windows and his iPhone. But part of his challenges are he's got very limited use of his hands. So anything we can move to the voice for him is a great benefit. His level of smart home tech that was in place initially was simply a smart home hub, one of the hubs I was telling you about, and a front door lock. And he still had to manually push a button on his cell phone to tell the hub to open the lock to let his caregivers in or other people in. So that's all he had at the time. And he originally reached out because he wanted to start using voice to manage a whole number of other aspects within his environment. So everything from lighting to TVs, climate control, access control, and some of these became really acute as we got to know him and get involved in his environment. So the solution that we ended up with developed over time, and this is a very regular thing to see. So we start with something and it just evolves, and as more technology comes out, because remember, smart home technology is still very nascent. It's still in its early growth phases, and there's lots of new things that literally 6 months ago didn't exist, but we now have access to. So it's almost an ongoing journey. I'm a fully able-bodied person in my own home, but I'm constantly adding stuff because I need to know it, number one, and two, just adding more value. So his environment, we had a Samsung Smart Things hub, and this is probably one of the most well-known hubs on the marketplace. It was originally Samsung. Now they've pushed the manufacturing the hardware off to another company, but they still manage the ecosystem. And if you look at the Smart Things website, there's just hundreds and hundreds of companies with thousands of devices that can participate in the ecosystem. So it's one of the reasons we like it is it's reasonably simple, so folks can set it up themselves, and it has just probably the widest variety of supported devices out there. We then added Z-Wave light switches, and Z-Wave is one of those protocols I was mentioning on the first slide, how these devices communicate. So the more you get devices all sharing the same protocol, the faster the network becomes, if it's Z-Wave or Zigbee. So every device that's powered that you add to the network gives one more route back to the hub for other devices to use. So the more devices, the more efficient it becomes. So we try to standardize in any environment on one if we can. That's not always possible, but that's what we try to do. So we got Z-Wave light switches and smart plugs. The door is Z-Wave. His thermostat is a Honeywell, and it's all of it talks Z-Wave. We then needed to add some things that aren't smart devices on their own. So, for example, he's got a ceiling fan in each of his rooms, and one in his bedroom, one in his living room. He's got floor standing fans. He's got a space heater, and why that's important will come up here in a second. But those all just use infrared or radio frequency remotes. So there's this thing called a Harmony Hub, and there are others on the market as well, Broadlink and things of that nature, that effectively emulate the device's native remote control and communicate with that non-smart device with that, and then relays that information to the Smart Things Hub or to the main home automation hub. So then he can now say, Alexa, please turn on my floor lamp, and the message will be interpreted by Alexa. It'll tell the Harmony Hub to send out the command that's the equivalent of pressing on the radio frequency control. So that allows us to access a whole bunch of things, even old TVs, old entertainment systems, all of them. Any that's got an infrared or radio frequency remote control, we can pretty much bring into the smart home environment and control it that way. When we first met, he didn't have any Alexa devices, but now he's got two Fire TV cubes. Now, for those who aren't familiar with that, that is just a set-top box. It's a smart box that sits and connects to the network and plugs into an HDMI port on the TV, and now can even give older TVs a smart TV environment. And you can stream all your Netflix and HBO Max and Disney Channel and get access to normal cable TV and all that through this device. And it also has Alexa built into it. So again, when we try to go to environment, we try to standardize. If somebody is an ardent fan of Apple technology, we'll probably use Siri and HomeKit. If they are more of an Alexa fan, we try to make everything Alexa. Same thing with the Google. So those are the three main ecosystems. Once in a while, we need, for backup purposes, to put something else in, and I'll talk about that next. But for the most part, he controls his entire apartment using these two Alexa, a Fire TV cube in his bedroom, one in the main room, an Echo Show, and the app on his PC in his iPhone. We do have one Google Home little pod that's there. And the reason for that is if his Alexa device, his Fire TV cube in his bedroom, for some reason stops responding, and that happens, anything electronic, it could be a firmware or software update that happened overnight, it just stops working. I would just get up in my house and just go unplug it and plug it back in, but he can't do that. So what we did is we put a smart switch on the power unit that powers the Alexa devices, and he can have Google Assistant tell Alexa to repower and vice versa. So it's just kind of a degree of redundancy because he's become quite dependent on this technology. And so that was an important thing. The next thing we built for him, and this was again a challenge that he faced nearly daily. He would have to, if you went to visit him, you go to this communal panel outside the building. They've got a security gate, and you type in 471 #, and that would call him on his telephone, his cell phone. He'd have to struggle to get to his phone and then try to manage it. Again, he's got very limited use of his hands to try to manage it, answer the call, find out that it's Forrest, then have to press the 6 key on his iPhone, which is not very big. And that would send a number 6 DTMF tone down the wire and the gate opens. That's how it works. So what we did is we created a custom electronic device that is just, it's a little MP3 player on a stick, and it effectively is now part of the Alexa ecosystem. We built a little routine for it. So now I go and hit 147#, and the call comes through Alexa, and it announces that it's the front door. He answers the call. I announce that it's me. He just then says, Alexa, open sesame. And that routine sends that DTMF signal down the line, and the gate opens. So he didn't have to touch anything. He could do it from his bed. He could do it from anywhere he is, just all through his voice. And that was a huge advantage for him. So kind of to summarize where he is now and the results he's felt, just about everything in his home that he would ever have any desire to control. We didn't automate his microwave oven or his refrigerator, because those are things he can't interface with anyway. His caregivers do that. But anything that he can manage and would be useful to him to manage, we've automated. So you see the thing up there, I've got backup heater. One evening, about 6 months after we started working with him, his gas central heater in his room went out at about 2 a.m, and his blanket slipped off. And the poor guy was shivering until 8 o'clock in the morning when his first caregiver came to visit him. So the very next day, we put in a space heater. Now, if something like would happen, he can actually tell Alexa to turn that heater on at least, and at least stay warm throughout the night. So just all these little things that a lot of us take for granted. When you live in an environment or a situation where you just cannot physically go flip a switch or change something, being able to do that through voice is critical. So he has said, and this is a direct quote, he almost had a tear in his eye. He just said to me once, he's got more independence now than I've ever had my entire life. And he just turned 70. So that's one really classic example of the benefits of using basic standard home automation, with the one exception of that DTMF signal generator. Everything else is off the shelf. Future enhancements, we're going to be working with him to get him migrated off local only, migrated off the web or the internet and the cloud into local only. And I'll tell you why. So about 6 months ago, 5 months ago, he called me in a panic because he's got my cell phone number, and he calls me in a flat panic. Nothing's working for him. Alexa won't talk to him. Google Assistant won't talk to him. Even the Smart Things app on his phone doesn't do anything. And I said, well, I can try to stop by in about 3 or 4 hours. I stopped by to take a look at it. And just as I arrived, everything started working again. And we joked that Alexa must have known I was going to come around and talk to her. But turns out that AWS, Amazon Web Services, was down all across the country. So Spotify wouldn't work. You couldn't make orders on Amazon. Just a whole range of services that are critically dependent on Amazon Web Services were gone, including Alexa, including Smart Things, including the Logitech Harmony Hub. They all depend on that connection to the internet. So we're in the process of migrating all of his tech off of cloud dependence, so that should he lose his internet connection, should Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure not work, he can still use his voice to control his local environment. It also radically reduces latency, because when you think about it, if he says, Alexa, unlock the front door, that signal gets interpreted, it has to go up to Amazon Web Services, they decipher that what he just said, then that sends a message over to Smart Things, which then comes back to the Smart Things hub locally and tells the lock what to do with itself. So all of that can be, a lot of latency. And so if you can get everything local, things happen instantaneously. And then there's the increased security. So I've got some clients who just don't want any thing to do with Alexa or Siri or anything because they think Big Brother's watching and they want everything off the cloud. So those are 3 good reasons. And there is a voice assistant that is an open source project called Mycroft. And you can put it on a Raspberry Pi, you can put it on a PC. They're now also producing an actual Mycroft device. It's kind of Alexa type thing, Echo type device. It's got a screen and a speaker and a microphone. And it is entirely local. So you just need to train it originally, give it lots of vocabulary, and it takes maybe a few months to get really, really dialed in. But once it's in, that's it. And we will eventually replace his Smart Things hub with one that is a local only hub that doesn't require access to the cloud and things of that nature. So eventually, we'll get him completely off the web, which will be or off the cloud, which would be, I think, a fantastic thing. Automating curtains is something we've talked about. So he has to wait for his caregiver to come in to open or close curtains for him. We want to automate his main door and his sliding glass door out to his balcony, and that's something in the works. He recently got stranded because his wheelchair charger hadn't been plugged in properly, and he didn't realize it. He went out on the streets to go visit some friends, and his wheelchair died. So having wheelchair charge status or battery status and adding alerts to him, so he can say, Alexa, what's the charge on my wheelchair before I go out, and also get alerts saying, you've just left the building, you've only got 5%, you might want to turn around. And then the last thing he's really wanting to do is get an automatic, like a hospital type bed, and have that integrated in the system so you can have tell Alexa to lift the back or lift his feet or things of that nature. So that's our to-do list going forward with Larry. So let's stop for a moment and see if folks have got questions on that particular use case. I see one of the questions came earlier. I think we've addressed that already. What happens with a power outage? Well, without power, all your electronics are down, unless you've got something like a Tesla Powerwall or some other massive electrical storage facility or a generator, right? So the electrical grid, that's an altogether different thing. We have helped people automate CPAP machines and get them onto uninterruptible power supplies. So I'm not seeing any.
We do
questions.
have one other question. Joe, I unmuted you, so you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thanks. So you're using an existing Alexa device to control the curtains. So what are you installing, like on the, say for example, the curtains or the blinds or whatever? Are they smart curtains, or are you modifying the curtains to be smart?
Both are capabilities. So there's a bunch of companies that do smart roller blinds, smart curtain openers and closers. But there's also aftermarket products that if you've got an existing blind, you just snap this onto the strings, and it'll actuate the motor to close or open the things, or change the louvers on it. So both are accessible. There's some that you can completely do it yourself. There are others that you'll get the shade company to come in and install these expensive systems for you. So it's a wide range of options there. There's another question: how do you automate a sliding door? There are a handful of companies. Olide is the one that I think is probably the most well known. They do conventional door openers, but they also have an actuator. It's kind of like a piston that will just slide a door open and closed again. And I'd be very happy to send links to anybody who's interested. I can put together a list of links for all these technologies we talked about today, so you can just go and take a look at them if you're interested. Let me see. So Jen has a question: to confirm clients should look for devices that have IR or RF remotes. So modern products that are coming out oftentimes have Alexa or Google built into them. But for existing things that we have in our home already that don't have the advantage of having smarts built into them, being able to control them with RF and IR is definitely was a game changer. And so there are companies like Broadlink. I mentioned the Logitech Harmony Hub. There are a handful of others that do this really well. And even if they don't have in their massive list of supported products, they don't even have it, you can actually pair the existing remote with the hub, put it in learn mode, and it will learn the signals. So I have found very few devices that have got some kind of remote that we can't actuate through smart home technology. Okay, there's a question, will wheelchair power updates include Tekla? I'm not sure what that is. But I'm going to put my email up at the end of this. So anybody who's got a follow-on question, feel free to send it directly. Should I move on to the second case study? Does that seem appropriate? Victor, what do you think?
Yeah, that's good. We have 2 more questions if you want to answer those real quick, or we can come back to them.
Okay, I'm just cognizant of the time. So are there ways to voice control ceiling fans that are controlled through switches? Yes, there are ways of doing that. So there's you replace a switch with a smart switch, and there's a dozen vendors that have really good switches, and you can tell it to switch to high, medium, low. Sometimes they have 4 speeds, and again, that can be automated. And yeah, okay, so I think that's any recommendation on contractors retrofits in Southern California? Yeah, again, send me email and I'll put you in touch with folks. Definitely have a handful of folks that I could recommend. Okay, so let's talk about Lisa. Now, Lisa she lives in Montera. She is hearing impaired. She had full hearing just 5 years ago, and then through a deteriorating condition, she's lost hearing in both ears. And she's still very independent, but she just has an increased sense of vulnerability, I think is probably the best way to put it. So she lives with one of her adult sons in a 4-bedroom home, and her understanding of technology is quite basic. She knows how to drive her iPad and iPhone and her Apple MacBook, but not much beyond that. And she only had one Echo device in the house at the time. And her initial requirements are really to get visual notifications when visitors or packages arrive, and also increase security. So those were the main things that were in her mind when we first started chatting. So we sat down, and again, SmartThings Hub, the older version. And the reason she chose that is it came with a whole SmartThings security kit. It had door and window sensors, motion sensors, so she just bought that whole thing. And the other thing about the SmartThings Hub 2 versus the later versions is it actually has a battery backup and a cell backup. So if she lost power, and in Montero you use a lot of power often, if the power goes, there's still a way of the system communicating. Just like before, we went with Z-Wave light switches and power outlets throughout the place. An August smart lock. One of the reasons why people like August is it just clamps onto your existing door lock, your bolt, as opposed to having to replace the entire thing. So that's one of the advantages there. The real key to changing her life was the Philip Hue hub and LED strips and bulbs. So in every single room in the house, bathroom, kitchen, pantry, you name it, we've got colored Philips Hue bulbs or LED strips. That allows us to communicate with her using light, color, the frequency of blinking and flashing, and that'll become kind of apparent here in a second. Now she has the Echo device that she originally had, and we've installed an Echo B4 smart thermostat that also has Alexa built into it. So she's got two places where she can interface with Alexa. We installed a Ring video doorbell and Blink security cameras. Again, she won good camera coverage because she now is feeling more vulnerable than she did before. And since we got to know her, her husband also passed. So I think just that extra sense of security is what she was really after. I mentioned the SmartThings security kit, so motion and contact sensors on every single door on the lower floor and anything off the deck as well. And then we installed a couple of First Alert Z-Wave combination smoke and CO2 sensors, glass break sensor. And the glass break sensor just listens, and if it hears something that sounds like glass breaking, it triggers an event. And that could be sending her an alert, it could be flashing yellow lights, it could be calling a 911, whatever happens to be, whatever the routine calls for. So those are the basic elements of the technology we put in place. So it allows you to voice control many of the items in the house, but it's taking quite some time for Alexa to learn her voice because she can't hear her own voice. And so it's not as clear and crisp and articulate as others. So it took Alexa a bit longer to learn, but now there's I think a good understanding. So now she gets 90% of the time she gets her idea conveyed to the environment. Notifications, alerts, and escalations are really critical. So being able to say, somebody's pressed the front door, quickly, flash a blue light in all the rooms to say there's somebody at the door, you need to go, let them in, is really important. And also having escalations if an event has been triggered based on something that is unwanted, like glass break detected, or she's at home and there's no detection of her sons being present through geofencing, then call it an alert or set an alarm or call 911 because somebody's entered her home that isn't somebody who should have. Those kind of things. So having that escalation tree is really important. The visual notification of events. This was really the game changer for her. And we can do very quick flashes to warn of a fire event versus slower flashes, which might be the alarm got triggered by a contact sensor. So we can do a wide variety of things can be conveyed just through the combination of color and frequency of flashes. And it has given her a much greater sense of safety, security, and just well-being. She just sleeps better at night, knowing that she's got an environment that will talk to her on her terms right now. Where we're going with her, again, we may migrate her over to a local only for all the same reasons I mentioned. We're doing that with Larry. We're probably going to be replacing the blink cameras with higher definition and a more intelligent system so that we can invoke AI object and facial recognition. Now, it's neat for me. I have it in all my cameras on my security system around my house, and I've got it set so it will tell me not only has a delivery been made, but it'll tell me it was a FedEx truck versus a DHL versus UPS. It'll tell me that thing that just set off a motion sensor in my backyard was a raccoon, not my dog. So those kind of things. But it also gives very, very accurate facial recognition. And this will be great for her because she'll be able to say, not only is somebody at your front door, but John is at your front door, or Mary and Beth are at the front door. So it just gives her, again, that greater sense of knowing what's going on. The next thing we're also going to be doing is putting tablet dashboards in every room. So I mentioned, we have these dashboards, which is a visual user interface for many of these systems. We have tiles for various things. And this is going to be really important for her as well. So she shares a condition that my wife has, which is she suffers from severe vestibular migraines. And they can be triggered by stress. They can be triggered by a handful of things, two of which are a rapid change in elevation or rapid change in barometric pressure. So in our home, I've got it set so that my wife gets alerts, whether based on the National Weather Service, they're telling us that there's going to be a change in barometric pressure. Or if there was one identified, it quickly sends her an alert because then she knows a migraine's coming and it's coming fast. And she's not going to be able to walk properly, stand properly. So she needs to get herself into a safe zone. So having tablet dashboards in every room for somebody who can't hear the alerts is going to be, I think, quite an important thing for her. So we're working on that. Again, geofencing, we've already done that. That's been knocked off the list. So if either of her sons are home and an event happens, there is one series of things that take place. If they're both gone and that event happens, like the glass break sensor goes, then another routine takes over. So knowing who's there is really important. And the next case study will be another example of that. And then we're starting to experiment, or about to experiment with a bright sign glove integration. I'm not sure if the listeners are familiar with that, but bright sign glove is a glove that somebody wears and it interprets sign language, and not just American Sign, all the various sign language variations around the world. You can even create your own language or your own vernacular. And it's quite a fascinating thing. It'll convert your sign to text or to speech. So if you want to communicate with somebody who is in another room, another planet, another continent, and you use sign, and they will hear or read what you're signing. So it's a fascinating thing, and this is quite nascent and quite new to us. So it's going to be interesting. Any questions on that? So the question is Bright Sign Glove for one or two-handed signing? The demos I've seen are one-handed. I've actually put that question out to the company that provides this, and I'm curious to see what the feedback's going to be. So I would love to see what the response is. So, any other questions? Okay, let me move on to the. Oh, wait a second. Again, I'll put the question was what's the price on the gloves? I'm not sure. I'll put a link to the company. I think it's just gloves.com or brightsign.glove.com. But I'll put a link in and we'll make that available. So our third and final study is Carl. Carl lives with his wife and small dog in San Mateo, and he's got some cognitive decline that's starting to impede his quality of life. And he had the foresight to say, I'm starting to have this decline. I want to get some things to automate my environment to provide more safety, security, and convenience, and do that before I've lost the ability to do that. And that's his concern. So he wants to reduce the burden on his wife and make things safer, because he is fairly convinced that he does have continual decline, and he's just wanting to make it easy on everyone. So he has medium to high dependence on his wife, depending on the day, to be honest. Sometimes it's low even. So as I said, he lives with his wife and small dog in an older 3-bedroom home, and I'll explain why that older comment is important. And he's got a large garden. He loves gardening. He's a fantastic green thumb. His garden looks immaculate. And he's got a pond in the back, and he just spends much of his time out there. So, it's one of the things that just brings him joy, and anything you can do to make it safe and easier for him, the better. So his level of understanding was very reasonable, I would say. He's in his 70s, and he had a good mastery of what was available. When he reached out to us, he's kind of an Apple guy, so he's got iPad, iPhone, iMac, I think. He had already had Apple HomeKit put in and a few little Belkin switches. So that was where he was at the time. And he really wanted from us, what he wanted was to help him increase the convenience and the safety aspects of living at home. So our team went out, spent some time with him, and they put a base solution together. And again, just like I mentioned with the first one, these things evolve over time. So this is 2.5, 3 years of evolution. Smart Things Hub at the center. Again, this is a brain that controls everything, takes all the inputs, sends the messages out to do things. Zigbee light switches in this case. And the reason Zigbee is not, we use Zigbee in this case and not Z-Wave, is because he lives in an older home, and prior to 1973, I think it is, the building code did not require a neutral wire in light switches. Most smart switches, light switches, require the neutral line so they can get power to work. And so we had to go with one of the two only manufacturers that I'm aware of, or we're aware of, that have a smart switch that does not require that neutral line. Because without that, you'd have to rewire the house or every switch box. So that wasn't tenable. So we went with a thing called Lutron Cassetta, which is one of these things that uses Zigbee as its language. But the nice thing about a smart home, the Smart Things Hub, is it knows all the languages. So it knows Zigbee, it's fluent in Z-Wave, it's fluent in TCP/IP, it knows Bluetooth. So it can talk to each device using their language and bring it all together. And that's the nice thing about having a universal hub. Had a bunch of Wi-Fi smart plugs, he had Apple HomeKit. We installed a Z-Wave brake sensor for a different reason in his case, that glass brake sensor. And it's because a couple of times he had knocked over a wine bottle or a glass of water or something in the kitchen, and we wanted some way of alerting his wife, who might be downstairs, to come up and fix that. We installed a panic button at his request, because one night at 2 a.m, his little dog went out to the dog door and slipped into the pond and was crying for help and couldn't get out. So he was very confused and bewildered at 2 a.m, having been awakened from a deep slumber. And so he said, "You got to put something here so that I can hit the button and all my lights will come on, and so I can get out there quickly." So we did that. And the team also put in a little escape ramp at the end of the pond, so Sparky could get out on his own if he had to. That was just a side thing. Not necessarily smart, but it's a smart thing to do. We installed a Philips Hue hub, again, for the outdoor bulbs. They're the only game in town at the time for really industrial outdoor floodlights. So we put that in. But Apple Tag. So Apple Tag is kind of like the tile things that use a combination of Bluetooth and one other protocol for tracking things, people, pets, devices, items, whatever. So we've got one on his belt buckle. He's a man of habit, and he always wears the same belt every day. So there's one in his belt buckle, one on his dog's collar. And we tied those in along with his iPhone, iPad, and his Apple Watch into geofencing. So if any of those things goes off the property, and strays more than 20 feet, 30 feet, without him specifically saying, I'm going someplace, and disarming that alert, then his wife will be notified. And it's an important thing. He thinks it's important. He's not there. He doesn't feel he needs it yet, but he thinks he's going to need it soon. Again, we put in the first alert, Z-Wave combo smoke and CO2 sensors. And we also put in motion sensors in many of the rooms, including the kitchen, because a couple of times the two of them had left the home and left the gas stove on. So just by combining a motion sensor to see if there's anybody in the kitchen, geofencing to see if their phones or their devices are there, and a smart gas line valve, we're able to say, as soon as any of these conditions happen, both phones are gone, or there's no motion in the kitchen for X amount of time, that gas valve that powers the stove gets shut off. Just a huge safety aspect to it. I mentioned that he's an ardent gardener, so he's fallen a couple of times in his garden. So the fall detection facility on the Apple Watch is enabled, and a couple of times his wife has got alerts to go down and get him out of a bush. We installed a Rocky 3 smart sprinkler controller, replaced his old Rainbird, because again, this thing just automates everything, and anything we can do to automate and make his life simpler, the better. So you just go and program the various zones and tell each zone what the soil type is, the drainage type, how much sunlight it gets, the type of shrubs or plants that are growing there, and then it determines how much water it needs based on weather events. So it will tell him, it'll give him notices saying the reason your sprinkler didn't come on today is because of the wind, and that gives him a peace of mind as well. So he's not sitting there saying, why are my sprinklers not going off today? Well, the wind is going to make it evaporate, so it's not sensible to use it. He had Nest security cameras already, but we added those to his iPad. Again, he's got the Smart Cleans Hub app. And so now he can just click on one button, all of his cameras come up on his iPad, and you can see what's happening in the front yard, 2 in the backyard, what's happening in his garage. And again, we built a bunch of routines that do a handful of things. One of them is monitoring his response time. So he perceived that he was taking longer and longer to do a certain thing, maybe answer a phone when it starts ringing. So we now have got a thing that checks, and it'll let him and his wife know that, 2 months ago, you would answer your phone on average in 2 rings. Now it's 4 rings. Just gives him a sense of the, where his state is, and alerts and that escalation. So again, if his wife's gone and he's home using geofencing, and an event happens, that his next door neighbor, who's nearly always home, come over and see what's going on. So the results, he's visual, and he's a very visual guy. So he doesn't have any voice device in his house. So no Alexa, he doesn't even use Siri on his iPhone or his pads. He just doesn't like that, but he's very visual. So he likes to push buttons on his iPad. He gets all these little notifications, so that's great. He gives visual, control of many of the things in his house. That refined alert and escalation tree is really important for an event that happens and his wife's not home. Numerous automations and routines. Automated daily reminders is really important for him. So he oftentimes will forget, even before he was diagnosed with dementia, he'd forget to take his medications, certain ones he'd take every other day. So this just gives him that little reminder. Remind him to charge his watch. So we've got a Bluetooth proximity thing. If he sits down in his armchair to watch news or whatever it is, it sends an alert saying, charge your watch, because that's the perfect time to do it. Because he's sitting there, he's going to be there for an hour because he's going to watch, whatever show it is. That's a great time to charge it. So he can put it back on and have it on all night when he's sleeping. So in essence, it's given he and his wife a much greater sense of safety and security, and it's just made things easier for them as they age. They don't have to do as many things manually. Where we're going with him, again, we've talked about potentially migrating him off the cloud. He's kind of on the fence on that. Doing some behavior analysis and pattern deviation notification. So if the system notices that he, based on motion sensor or where his tag is, he does certain things every day, and as I said, he's a creature habit. If suddenly he stops doing that or doesn't do it this time, maybe just alert the wife to know that there might be something that should be looked at. Again, just like Lisa, we're thinking about putting a tablet dashboard in each room, so he doesn't have to sit down in his chair and think, oh, darn, I forgot and left my iPad in the other room and have to get up and go get it. So just having a visual eye on things makes him feel comfortable. AI object, but more importantly, facial recognition for a different reason here. So he'd like to avoid embarrassing situations where he opens the door, he knows somebody, but he can't remember who that somebody is. So we'd like to be able to say, Carl, John Watson has just arrived and is at your front door. That way you can say, John, how's it going? And avoid that embarrassing situation. And it could also recalibrate his association. And then last, automating the lighting management side of things, because oftentimes both he and his wife will be downstairs at the lower floor and they'll just leave a bunch of lights on and they'll forget and they'll come out. And the next morning and the lights are on all night. So just being able to say, there's been no motion here based on this time of day, we're going to shut the light off and we'll shut it back on as soon as we detect motion again. So those are all things that we're building in for them now. Just like before, let's open the floor for questions on that particular use case. And then if there's nothing specific, we can just talk about anything general that you might be wondering.
We do have a question from Jen. Do individuals pay for these devices and your services? Are there social service agencies that pay for those services?
So I'll talk to one of those. I typically get contracted directly by the clients. I tend not to sell things. I prefer to say, here's a link on Amazon, you order it. That way the warranty is in your name and all that good stuff. There's no markup that's needed. You just get Amazon and my team will come out and install it and configure it and do the routines. There are some programs that do provide some funding for some of these things. And maybe Catherine, you might be able to speak to that.
It would depend on the devices. We did a financing webinar a number of months ago. I think it was in November's. And if you look at the YouTube playlist, you'll see that you can watch that. It gives you ideas on how to get financing, how to get discounts, a whole lot of stuff. But I'm also going to throw my email into the chat. So if you have any questions on top of that webinar, it was this same series, Smart at Home webinar, but for financing, you can reach out to me and I can get you some direct information because there actually have been some changes that have occurred since that webinar, which I'm happy to report.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to close with one slide that I used last time as well, but it's really important for people to consider. Oftentimes there are some concerns with smartening up the home, right? And they typically are privacy and security. So I mentioned some of those earlier. There's some folks that just don't want Big Brother being able to look at what's going on in my house. I'm less concerned. There are a handful of Chinese camera manufacturers the US government has banned from any governmental thing. I get that, but I really don't get too concerned if Chairman Xi and his cronies can take a look at which corner of the garden my dog does his business in. I really don't care. But making sure it's on its own virtual private network and not able to access any of my other stuff, that really is important. So that's how you implement things, not necessarily keep it unplugged. So privacy and security is an issue. Complexity. I mean, again, I talked about multiple protocols. You got multiple vendors. You got some of these protocols being replaced by newer ones like Thread and Matter. If you hear those are the newer protocols that are starting to be supported. So a lot of complexity. How do we set the network so it is safe and it is responsive? So I am a big proponent of a thing called virtual networks, which is you're taking devices of a certain type and all putting them into one cluster on the network that can't talk to anybody else, can't talk to the outside world, just talk to each other and the hub. And that keeps people from being able to backdoor into your network, steal credit card information, all that good stuff. I've got one set up, one dedicated to all my Internet of Things or home automation stuff. I've got one for my security cameras. I've got one for my trusted devices like my computer, cell phones, tablets. I've got one for guest. And so just having somebody who really knows networking can be really useful in avoiding security issues, and that can be complex. Costs, so that was already asked earlier. You have setup costs, you have ongoing maintenance, licensing costs for some. So Wink was one of these hubs that was well thought of because it was super simple. They nearly went bankrupt and then suddenly sprung a $5 a month fee on everyone that was a Wink customer. And if you don't like it, we're going to shut you down. So 2 of these clients I mentioned as case studies started with Winks. We moved them off that because they just didn't like that bait and switch approach. But these are all things to consider. Anything that's cloud dependent may at some point be a challenge if you lose your internet connection, if Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure go down. Those are all issues. Latency, I mentioned that earlier, but if you have a lot of Wi-Fi devices, they can be quite slow because, again, they got to talk to your router, go up to the cloud, get whatever service is needed. That's got to come back down again, and so that can be quite an issue. Pace of change. So just keeping up with what the art of the possible is, like the glove that we talked about earlier. That's brand new. That's not something that was on our radar a year ago, and so just keeping up with both the pace of change in the technology and in our client's condition is also really important. So being able to recommend changes based on changes of their condition or their environment or their needs. And that's a really important thing. And then a really important one is getting buy-in from other members of the house. So my wife is not a big fan that there's another woman living in this house. Her name is Alexa. She's not a big fan of that at all. So I typically have all the Alexa devices muted, but I can still access it through my phone and I can get things done. So just making sure that everyone else is going to be supportive of it is I think, a really important thing. As I mentioned, here's my telephone number, my email address. Feel free by all means to send me any direct queries you might have. Send me an email if you'd like a link to a bunch of the technology suppliers I mentioned, and somebody in Southern California. Send me a message and I'll give you a couple of folks that you could probably speak to down there. One last thing, and it'd be interesting to see if we could get this as kind of just put it in the chat window, the question and answer. One of the things that we've been pondering is creating a human monitored service for folks. So what I mean by that is, just like you have ADT monitors your alarms, and if a smoke alarm goes off, they'll call 911 and get the fire truck out. If a window's been broken into, they'll call the police. We're thinking about setting up an escalation tree that if an event happens for somebody who needs help and their people in their own escalation tree, their son or their friend or the neighbor hasn't got back within X amount of time, we will actually do something like call the ambulance or get somebody else who's on our list to actually go help assist. So it'd be a monitoring service that says, the leak detector. A leak detector has been detected in this person's house and they're on vacation. All those things. So if anyone's interested, we're pondering doing an escalation kind of service that would be manned by actual humans 24/7. But we're just doing some early research to see if there's really a need for that. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you very much for your time today. I hope you got out as much of it as I hope to convey.
Thank you, Forrest. And before we end our webinar today, we did have some giveaway prizes. So I will be selecting 2 winners at random. First one, Crystal Gunn, congratulations. And Tracy Beckham, congratulations. You are our winners today. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope everyone has a good afternoon.